Welcome to That's a Hard No, the podcast about learning to say no and set boundaries to live our best lives. I'm your host, Heather Drago. You may think, because of this podcast, that I'm a boundary setting expert, but I'm not. I'm an expert at struggling to set boundaries. But you know what? I'm working on it, and it is getting easier. Follow along with me as I learn from fellow strugglers and experts so that you too can start saying no without feeling fear, guilt, or FOMO.
You don't know where to go. Unfriendly applications got you feeling low. You're not sure what to do. Weight of expectations is coming down on you. There's a phrase you should know. Tastes so much sweeter than hello. That's a hard no.
So here's a question. What's with everyone suddenly getting diagnosed with ADHD? What happened? Why does it seem like more kids than not are labeled as neurodivergent lately? Why are colleagues my age all suddenly announcing they have ADHD? Is this all real? Are doctors overdiagnosing because of pressure from big pharma? Are the GMOs and plastics in water affecting our brains? Is it the fault of social media? Is it our fault as parents? Have we done something wrong? The answer, of course, is no. People have always had these issues. We just haven't been looking closely enough to notice. And with enough empathy for each other, we can remove the burden of silently dealing with and suffering neurodivergence alone. It's nobody's fault. There's nothing wrong with you or your diagnosis or your kid. It's just a way that you or they are. Our society tacks on so much judgment about ADHD, autism, executive dysfunction, and a laundry list of other taboo diagnoses. It's no wonder that people are just starting to take control of their mental health and do what's best for them, whether or not there's a stigma. Additionally, families are finding more and more resources to help them tackle these issues as they're identified in their kids. Our guest today, Maria Duroseau, is one of the people helping families and individuals make heads or tails about ADHD in themselves or their loved ones. A graduate of the Harvard Pediatric Leadership Program and a practicing physician in 3 states, she's made her passion for supporting and enhancing parents her profession. So hi, Maria. Thank you so much for coming on That's a Hard No.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I have lots and lots of questions for you, but I'm so fascinated. I hear you just wrote a children's book, and I would love to know more about it.
I did. It is called Is This Going to End Well? And this was born out of parenting my child with ADHD and just really close into the journey here. There was a lot of, hey, stop, focus, all of these things. And I was just trying to find a different way to help him engage without getting all of that constant negative feedback. Because as you know, children with ADHD receive much more negative feedback than their peers. And so first the question, is this going to end well? And this is something that I was teaching him to ask himself and to check into his surroundings. Was he going to hurt himself? Was he going to break something? Or what was going to happen with his actions? So just to help him think through, so then he could backtrack and decide, did he still want to go ahead with what he was doing or not? So that is what the book is based on, and I'm excited.
And the name of the book again?
Is This Going to End Well?
Is This Going to End Well? Okay. That really resonates with me. I literally had a conversation yesterday with my youngest, who just graduated from a prestigious art school with a really good GPA and great career path ahead of them. And we literally had this conversation about multiple teachers who told them at different stages in their academic career, you're never going to go to college. You're going to work in a gas station. You're never going to get anywhere, because they were so frustrated. They didn't seem to have the tools as teachers to understand where this kid with ADHD, with diagnosed ADHD, was coming from and how to talk to them and encourage them, and literally would humiliate them in front of the class and say terrible, judgmental things. And I don't know why. Like, is it just, the square peg and the round hole in the public school system? But like, there were all these negative, hurtful, you know, things that were said that really affected their self-esteem and their belief in themselves as far as what they were capable of. And so I think this message with kids, of teaching them, like, you're not a terrible person, you're not a bad person, you just have this different way of thinking, and this is why you have to try these other ways of doing things. I think it's so important.
Absolutely. Which, first of all, congratulations to you and your son for graduating. I'm wishing him all the best. But you are right. I think quite a fair number of people are undertooled, underskilled in dealing with ADHD. And so I always start out with the idea of, I think maybe we could have named it something different,
Oh
Executive
yeah.
function disorder to me rings more truer. And in hearing that, instead of just thinking of a kid bouncing off the walls and just can't quit, you start thinking about it from that framework, and you understand that this is a lag in executive function. And so whatever behaviors I'm seeing are not out of just, the child not being smart enough or some kind of anger streak or whatever it is. It could just be that the child is not tooled enough to function in the environment that he's in. So then when we approach it from an executive function disorder, then we just realize that all I need to do is upskill this child. And so then here comes is this going to end well? He doesn't quite know how to self-regulate. He doesn't quite know how to see the future consequences. So let me give him a tool that he's able to run this through his mind.
Kind of play out, like almost role play out what's going to happen, you know? Yeah. Yeah. And I also think that with the moniker of ADHD, there's that hyperactive connotation. And a lot of people that I know have inattentive type of ADHD. So, like, a lot of the stigma and the stereotypes of kids with ADHD doesn't really apply to most people. And so it's like this hidden, invisible diagnosis, and people don't believe that someone has it, and they just think they're lazy or unorganized or,
Right. You get on
don't care.
on the one end, there's the idea that, hyperactive, this kid is just spoiled. You need to get them to settle down. And if I'm just firmer, just more strict, then I'll get them to settle down. And this is what, I hear a lot of parents when they're around family and so on. It's really frustrating or embarrassing for them because people think that they're just not, they're spoiling their child. Then on the flip side, you're absolutely right. The inattentive type where there's none of that hyperactivity, which, coincidentally is more in girls. Partly, I think some of the hyperactivity, quote unquote hyperactivity, is socialized out of girls. The games we play when we're younger, we sit and we do tea and we take turns and we're handing each other the teacup. So some of that is socialized out of us. So then you have somebody who has that inattentive type of ADHD too, that is struggling and gets those, if you just focus, stop daydreaming, pull your head out of the clouds kind of thing. And again, missing the whole idea that this is an executive function disorder and they just need to.
You counsel families, parents, about how to be the best parents they can be, to talk with their children who may have ADHD, and you've been doing that, and then it arrived in your family, and so you've seen it from both perspectives, from the professional pediatrician and then also as a parent. And so I would love to I wonder if you could, well, I have some thoughts and some answers queued up, but I would love to hear from your point of view, like, can you describe for us how someone with ADHD might be feeling and might be experiencing things, because we all, there are all these perceptions of people from the outside, but like, what might someone be going through? How can we approach people with empathy, understanding, the struggle?
One of the biggest things, particularly with children, is just this constant sense of, I'm not doing a good job. The constant
Mm-hmm.
sense that they're always disappointing their important adults or loved ones in their lives. These people out there think that I'm perfectly able to do these things and I just don't, versus I just can't. And so there's this sense of, I can never get it right. I can never get it right. And everybody expects me to be able to get it right, and I can never get it right. So then what's wrong? And there's, many variations of it, but I think it typically will boil down to some version of, I just can't get it right. Everybody seems to think I can, and I can't.
What are the kinds of things you've advised parents to think about, or ways they can talk with their children? And I'd be interested to know if you were able to objectively apply that as a parent yourself, or if it gave you a different understanding of how to advise parents.
It gave me a deepened understanding experiencing it. And I would say that we have had, it's still rocky some days, but I think that what has really helped is just the foundational understanding of what ADHD. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't understand ADHD to be an executive function disorder, you will approach them differently. You will approach each situation as something to discipline out of your child versus, okay, there's something that they're not able to do because there's a lag in their executive function. So how can I approach this situation to teach them this, or to just, provide that external executive function for them to move them through this situation? So, not trying to throw my husband under the bus or anything, but, this is not his field of practice. I know this is not his field of practice. So I could see the difference in parenting from my perspective, because this is what I do and I understand it from that executive function disorder, versus from him as he was still learning it. There's definitely different ways that we approach situations because of our different understandings of it. And so the very first thing I encourage parents to do is learn as much as you can about it. Learn as much as you can, read as much as you can. And I'm particularly, I really enjoyed Dr. Russell Barkley's take on ADHD. And he's the one who really made a push to focus on the executive function disorder part of it. And once you learn as much as you can, learn what the executive functions are, the self-awareness, the motivation, and so on and so forth. And so then it can kind of give you a framework of buckets, if you will. Whenever you're observing your child's behavior, understanding that their behavior is a communication of where they are lacking or lagging on a certain skill, and then try to provide that kind of external executive function to help them process through a situation. So there's this understanding that there's an executive function age versus their chronologic age. And so understanding that the executive function age is going to lag at least a year and a half below their chronologic age. And so then if you think about that, you have a 10-year-old, right? Then you can think about them. There's some parts of them that may behave like an 8.5-year-old. And then also understanding that this is not necessarily a global executive function delay. They might be at level with their peers in one sphere, and then they might not be at level with their peers in a certain sphere. And so then understanding this part lets you know, because I'll hear a lot from parents and, experience it in my house too. Well, he's able to do this, she can do this, but how come they can't do that, And so if you understand that there's an executive function age, and the executive function age might be different, definitely is going to be different than the chronologic age. And it's not all across the board of all executive functions. It's just, it may be certain ones.
That makes so much sense. In hindsight, looking at specifically my oldest child, that was definitely the case where he's like literally genius level IQ. And so it was so frustrating as parents to be like, he's so smart, he's so able to do these things, why can't he do this, why can't he do that? And I am neurodiverse myself. I have ADHD, my siblings have ADHD, my father was diagnosed late with ADHD. Like, my kids call it the genetic jackpot. They got all the fun things from us. But it was so frustrating, especially for my husband. I'll throw him under the bus since you're doing the same thing. For him, it was just so frustrating because, like, this kid's so smart, why can't this happen, or why can't he deal with this or the other thing? But um that makes a lot of sense in hindsight, and it's frustrating for me as a parent because I wish I had a time machine and I can go back, and I wish we knew the things we know now and there were the resources we have now, because when we were going through it, it was like the wild wild west, and you were just getting all kinds of different advice and teachers yelling at you, and it was just really frustrating. So I love, that's a really good piece of advice. Like, understand different function, your child in different spheres may have different age or
Right,
maturity. I
right.
think that makes a lot of sense to me.
So yeah, when I go through that, I think if you really, as a parent, take the time to sit and think that out as you look at all the different executive functions and say, you know what? Yeah, there are some things that we can do and we can do just fine. Then there's some things I can't understand how it's the same kid, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And then also
Mm-hmm.
just, really knowing what the executive function skills are. So, there's transitions that you go, for example, I'll give this, you go from external manipulatives into internal manipulatives. So, um, you'll see the kids, particularly in math or something like that, they have the little cubes that they're counting, or, the little things that they're moving along, where you have money that you're actually counting. That's your external manipulative. And then at some point, there's the transition that goes into internal manipulative. And so that's an executive function skill that's developing. And I'll give you a story of my son. Math was a really tough thing for him. He was just fine when we were doing this external manipulatives, but when it went to transitioning to the internal manipulatives, just really struggled. And I would see him still counting on his fingers, for working problems. And I'm like, bud, you should really try to work this out in your head. And it doesn't help that I loved math as a kid, and math came so easily to me. So I'm in my head, I'm like, just do it. Why can't you just figure the numbers out in your head? And I didn't realize how much pressure or stress I was putting on him with that, till I saw him one day hiding his fingers under the table. He was trying to, I know, he was trying to calculate this using his fingers, but he knew that mom thought that he should be able to do it in his head. And so then when
Yeah.
that finally clicked to me, I'm like, oh, it's just the executive function. Like, he hasn't transitioned yet into the internal manipulative. And so then go ahead and use your fingers, buddy. But this will be something in class too, the teachers are saying, and I've shared this story with patients in clinic, and I can't tell you how many kids, not the parents, but how many kids will chime in and say, yes, oh my gosh, to this. They've had some version of that experience where it was just they hadn't yet shifted into that they could do it, but then they weren't allowed to use the tools that they had to do it because we expected them to be somewhere where they weren't.
One of my kids can't, and this is partially had to do with when it was taught, and the day it was taught, they were out sick, and um, but they can't to this day really read a normal clock, like the dial clock, right? So um, I would tease them about it, but then I realized they grew up in a digital world where they didn't really need or dial clock. So I found a really big clock for our family room that actually has 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And I was like, I'm just going to put that there, and I'm just going to provide a tool so that they can figure it out. Like, and just stop harping on it. Like, you have to at some point, yes, I think we have to teach people right? And help them and give them tools and work on things. But also sometimes you just have to accept people for who they are. And like, that's not a big thing. Why am I making fun of this
Right.
person for, you know, um, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I always tell parents, you will always fail at parenting the imagined child. You have a chance at success of parenting your actual child. So then seeing them and just recognizing where they are, you have a chance of
Yeah.
actually speaking to that instead of, and this tears down self-concept, instead of saying, why can't you be this thing that I expect you to be?
Mhm. Okay, so great information so far. Can't wait to talk about more. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. That's a Hard No is brought to you by Clever Girl Marketing, my full service agency specializing in smart, strategic marketing solutions for businesses and nonprofits. Okay, so you're probably wondering, Heather, what's with the podcast about boundaries? Why not marketing? Well, maybe in the future, but for now, it actually does relate, so bear with me here. Smart marketing, strategic marketing, requires knowing what to say no to and why. Businesses and nonprofits get inundated with marketing options and offers every day. We help you cut through all that noise, focus on your specific needs, and develop actionable strategies that are doable and actually make sense. Whether it's websites, SEO, email, social, or traditional channels, we're experienced in all of it. So if you need help figuring out your marketing, visit our website, clevergrowmarketing.com, and get in touch. In the second half of the conversation, we talk about tips for parents to help kids at home with their ADHD. We talk about how we should respect kids with ADHD just like we would kids who have asthma or a tree nut allergy or any other kind of medical issue. And we also talk about the pressures of our school system and how parents get caught up with the competitive nature of academics. Okay, so I wanted to share a little story or a little thing that one of my kids told me. So as I said, like, it runs in my family. And one of my kids described having ADHD as the constant state of, when you wake up in the morning and you're warm and cozy and you're just relaxed and you're just loving how you feel and you don't want to get out of bed. You just don't want to you're just so comfortable and you have to get up and you have to go to school and do the thing, go to work, whatever, but you don't want to get out of bed. But eventually you drag yourself out of bed and you're late, right? Then you get in the shower and you're in the shower. You don't want to get out of bed to take the shower, but then when you're in the shower, you're like, oh, this is so great. I don't want to get out of the shower. And you're in the shower for 45 minutes and then you're even later. And then you go into your room and then you're crazily trying to get ready and go. And then you sit down to eat breakfast and then you just want to sit there and eat breakfast and you don't want to hurry up and go. So it's just like this constant, like, really a difficulty switching from one thing to another thing to another thing. And I find I have that problem when I'm trying to focus and I'm like really into something, I'll have a really hard time stopping what I'm doing and moving to the next thing, even though I know I need to. I just thought that was just an interesting thing. And so now when I see my kids, they're now adults. I keep calling them kids, but like, I just found that very helpful in their teenage years to know that's kind of part of the struggle. And that's why time management is an issue with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a big, the transitions are really hard for them. So
Right. There's definitely that hyper focus, which sounds kind of counterintuitive to ADHD. I thought it meant you can't focus and you can't be inattentive, but there is a hyper focus component to it. If you're focused in on something, things are almost zoned out, and then moving out of that space into another space is hard to do. And so then in that place of hyper focus, you lose track of time. And so like that time management factor is really hard. So this is another thing, that internal manipulator hasn't quite happened yet. So having as many external things as you can. And I just bought my son this really cool, it's just a face cloth, but what it does, instead of following the numbers, this red, it's colored in red, and then that red starts decreasing until time is over. So then it's a nice visual for him. to be able to look and say, okay, this is this chunk of time that I have. And so saying 10 minutes, bud, that doesn't resonate for him. But if he sees that chunk of red getting smaller, then he knows, okay, time is almost up for him.
When we're talking about ADHD and we're talking with teachers and we're talking with healthcare professionals and family members and playdate moms and like the people in our sphere, when should we think about boundaries? What should we tell people? What should we not tell people? What is it okay for people to say to our kids or not to say to our kids? Like, I would love to kind of bend this conversation towards boundaries and what we can do as parents to kind of teach our kids how to set boundaries, but also how to protect them with boundaries. Where would you like to go with that?
So the first thing I always like to say when talking about boundaries is to get a good understanding of what a boundary is. A boundary is something that you will do in response to whatever external circumstance that is. A boundary is not what you're going to try to make other people do. And this is a very important distinction to make, because it's difficult to hold a boundary when it depends on the other person behaving a certain way. And most of us, typically, when we're first starting to figure out boundaries, we base our boundaries on what we're going to ask the other person to do. Stop, we will beg them or cajole or threaten or whatever to get whatever response, versus, if I say, hey, I don't like the way you're talking to me. If you keep talking this way, I'm going to leave. That is something focused on something that I can control. This
Right.
person can choose to keep talking that way, or they can choose to stop talking that way. And I base what I'm going to do based on what they do, right? Versus, you can't keep talking to me that way. You've got to stop talking to me that way. That is not a boundary. And it just spins and you get no good result. So that's the first thing I want to say. If you're making a boundary, make sure that you're making a boundary based on what it is that you are going to do, not what you're going to ask the other people to do.
What you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept. Yeah.
Right. So then...
what's right for you, what's not right for you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So then when it comes to, for instance, play dates, those are always difficult thing to navigate, neurodivergent child or not,
Yeah.
There's always that dance. Where do I step in? Where do I not? One thing that I do find out is that parents, and I'm not excluded, we sometimes tend to parent from a place of embarrassment. What will people think about how my kid is? And so then when we make our boundary based on what we worry those people are thinking, then sometimes we end up coming down harder on our kid or stepping in sooner than we need to, instead of letting the kids. Sometimes kids can work things out and we give them a chance. But if we step in sooner, hey, bud, you need to stop that. Then the other parent or the other child starts looking and says, yeah, he should stop. Versus if maybe we had given a minute, they might have worked it out on their own. And so then we've got to step out of embarrassment, and so not parent from that place, which then allows us to be able to, if there's another parent that does or says something to our child that, internally we're like, I don't like how they said that. If you're parenting from a place of embarrassment, you're not going to step in. But if you're parenting from just kind of a place of, this is my kid, I understand how they are, I'll jump in and say, yeah, this is typically in our house, this is how we do things. So this is what this is how I'll deal with it here. Is that okay with you or not? If not, then we're just going to leave, or maybe we can plan for another day.
Are you truly accepting your kid for who they are if you're embarrassed out in the world with them? Or have you truly accepted, or is it we're just so worried about shame and what other people think, that it's just so ingrained in us that we can't get away from it. I'm wondering how parents can get past that, the stigma, the shame, the embarrassment part, and how to learn to accept the kids for who they are.
Well, ADHD, people kind of loosely say things like, oh, I'm having a squirrel moment, and oh, that's just my ADHD. We kind of made it something that it's not a true disorder. It's not a true dysfunction. It really is. And when you hear people making light of it and,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, again, you've probably heard it 100 times. Somebody's like, oh, that's just my ADHD acting up, and they don't truly have a diagnosis. So understanding that, number one, it is a true diagnosis. You're not going to feel embarrassed of your child that has asthma, right? You're not going to be embarrassed if your child has a broken leg. This is a true disorder. It is a true dysfunction. Mm-hmm. So I think, number one, kind of settling into that place. It's a little hard, of course, because then if you're accepting that this is a true dysfunction, then you accept all the things that come with it, but just really acknowledging that this is what it is. And so then when you're around people that may not have an understanding, that's an opportunity either to educate them that this is a true dysfunction. Hey, don't make light of that. My child is actually diagnosed with ADHD. So then saying my squirrel moment or my ADHD kicking in, they hear that and it almost belittles the experience that they're having with it, and so then also, when you're showing up to a play date or whatever other circumstance, just the same way that you would talk about your child's inhaler. Hey, we're not going to be around the bonfire a lot because my kid has asthma. And so we're just going to sit over here, or they need to take a break after running around so much because that flares their asthma up or whatever it is, that will be the same thing. We're not going to do this kind of game just because this kind of game puts them in a really big mood spin, and we'll take breaks. You might see me walking outside, up and down the hallway a little bit with him just to help him get beat. Or we have these tools that we use whenever he or she starts getting this way. I simply just ask them to breathe on a square. And this is something I have said to teachers or, church school or whatever it is. Like, these are the words that he responds to. When we were in baseball, there were certain things too. These are the things that he responds to. And we even came up with hand signals. When I did this, for baseball, it means, hey, you're starting to get into a spin, take your breath. And he knew that was a cue for him to start his forced breathing. And he would settle down. So just the same way that you would talk to a coach, a teacher, whatever it is about, your kids' allergies. My daughter has tree nut allergies. So that's one of the first things we introduce. Just checking around to see what the food is like. My daughter has allergies. That would be the same thing. Hey, my son has ADHD. We're doing a lot of work with him this way. And so these are the things that you might see me do. These are the things you might see him do. And this is how we deal with it. And so then if they're able to participate, great. If they're not able to participate in dealing with it the way that works, then that's kind of the boundary you establish for yourself. We're going to leave or whatever we're going to do.
What about good ways for kids to talk to other kids about their ADHD? Do you have any advice in that realm?
Well, number one, look at my book, and that'll be really great.
There you go.
That'll be
full circle.
to get an understanding of it. It's just, I use simple words for kids. Everybody's brain is wired a certain way. And your brain is wired sometimes that it'll move faster than your body. And so sometimes you may have to slow down. If there's something that you're doing, again, the question of, is this going to end well, helping them that? And so then they can share that. There's sometimes that my body is moving faster and I need some time to stop it. So then I start my forced breathing, or I ask myself this question, is it going to end well? Another tool that I like is kind of turtle. This is something I heard, I forget where, but it stuck with me, and I thought it was a great way of getting a child to slow down too and just be aware of where their body is. If a surprise turtle, what does it do? It draws its arms and legs in, and then it slowly peeks its head out to kind of look around and see, okay, what's going on? Let me make an assessment of the situation. And so the same thing, a child can do that. Turtle, you just say turtle, and it helps them, where are my hands and legs? Where should I take them off? Where should I, stop touching? And then let me look around and see. So then they can share some of the tools. When my mom says turtle, this is what she means. And I just need to take a minute to see what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I think what I found, they might not be able to discuss the nitty gritty of ADHD and neurotransmitter and all that stuff, but just the things that it makes them do, sometimes the things that they have a harder time controlling or working on, or why certain things take them a little longer, and then explaining their tools that way.
Do you find the question ever gets asked about how does my kid talk about their ADHD to other kids?
No, actually, that is not typically something that parents will. I don't think it's because they're not interested. It's just they don't even know where to start
Hasn't
asking.
gotten there yet.
Which again is kind of the point of my book. We talk a lot about ADHD, about the child, around the child. The adults or the teachers are talking, and we're having conferences, the pediatrician and the parents are talking, and we're having all these conversations, but there's very rarely anything to the child. And so I think that
From the child.
yeah, from the child, right.
Yeah.
And so to even ask like, hey, how does this impact school for you? Do your friends ever ask? I don't think that that's ever really a conversation that happens, just because partly there's no languaging for parents to even access. And then two, I think a lot of them are just trying to figure out a way to survive,
Yeah. I think we're so focused on academics and achievement and building that portfolio so that by the time you're in high school, you can say, I was in all these clubs and I accomplished all these things and I did all this volunteering and blah, 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 blah. And now I'm going to apply for college. I think, at least from my personal experience raising two children with ADHD, like it was really a struggle because they couldn't build that portfolio the same way other kids did. And it was just really, I just saw that as being such a part of the parenting focus for so many people that I wonder if it's just like we get caught up in the academic part of it when really I want healthy, happy kids who are kind and are doing something worthwhile that gives them fulfillment, like
You're right.
my measurement of success is different than other parents, maybe.
Right. Absolutely. And interestingly enough, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, if you read up on what they have to say about ADHD and so on, they point out that the prevalence of ADHD in the 1950s, was starting to get higher, and they attribute it to the fact that that's around the time that schools were starting to become more standardized. And
wow.
Right. And so when it became like, this is the way we do it, and this is how kids learn, and this is how we're going to structure it, then you started seeing more kids. Before that, they did have documented, cases. They didn't call it ADHD then, but they just had this understanding that there's some kids who did things differently. But then it started becoming more apparent at that time because school was more standardized. So there was a certain expectation of just how you function.
And this actually came up the other day when we were talking about school with my kids, is with ADHD often short-term memory is, working memory is really impaired. And our public school system is about memorization and standardized testing. There's no critical thinking. Like, there's no, learning how to learning how to think for yourself, how to analyze what's out in the world and piece things together. It's all about memorizing facts and regurgitating in a test. And for kids with ADHD, that's a nightmare.
That's really tough to do. That is really tough to do. And so, this is going off a little on a tangent. I'll get a lot of questions, of course, from parents about medication. Should we not, and so on. This is my general thinking behind that, is that we sign a social contract of sorts. We're going to send our kids to school, and this is the way school works. And then we get grades back, and we look at report cards, and we have parent-teacher conferences, etc. So if we're going to sign that social contract that we're going to have them function in this particular way, I think it's a little hard to send them into that social contract without giving them all the tools that we can to equip them, which may include medication. Now, I have some families, and because I live in a rural area, and we've lived in rural areas for a while, which we consciously made that choice. because I knew that my son had ADHD from a young age. I could just tell it, and we decided that the kind of social contract we're going to engage in is one that has a smaller school, one that has a school where they do a lot of things that they're outside, or they can sit under their table or sit in this chair, or, walk around and do the things, can ask the teacher, hey, can I take a walk outside and then come back in? This is the thing that we did because we wanted to wait. And, my husband was still kind of deciding how he felt about the whole thing too. And I said, well, we're going to have him in a different environment so that he's able to thrive. And then once the environment transitions, then we do, the social contract we sign. Now we're in a bigger school and so on. So we're on medication because, again, I said the things that we were able to do in certain spaces are not able to do in this space, but we can't expect the same output, right? Without then adding in another tool. So we sign all these social contracts, and as parents, we have to be aware of these things. Whatever it is that we're deciding that we want our child to be, it's only fair that we equip them. And if we're saying that we're not able to equip them, then we need to rethink what it is that we're requiring.
So we talked about school. We talked about talking with other people. How can we do things in our homes to help give kids an environment that is more conducive to addressing different ADHD needs?
One, for your younger kids, allowing as much playtime as you can. Any bouncing, outdoors, so on. And then just think about your expectations and your requirements. How many things do they get asked to do as soon as they walk through the door from school? Mind you, this is a kid who spent so much energy trying to function through the school day. Put your backpack there. Put that away. Grab that. Do this. Let's get ready for, so many requests. And you have to kind of think about it, this algorithm of what is really important and what needs to be done right now. So then rank it. How important is it? Is it more important, less important? Does it need to be done right now? Can it be done later? Does it have to be done by my kid? Does it have to be done by me? And so if you can kind of sort this out of what are the really critical, important things, and we have this algorithm as adults, the important, very important, and urgent, not important. So kind of do the same thing with your kid. What needs to be done right now? Half of the things really that we believe need to be done, if we really look at it with our ultimate goal of we want the child to thrive, maybe they don't need to be done that way. And so letting go of some of those things that you've just decided it has to work that way. And this can also be for teenagers as well. There's certain things that maybe don't have to go exactly the way that you think it has to be done. For the older kids, asking them too, if this is one of my favorite questions across the board, neurodivergent or not, if you were the adult, what would you do? And that question can sometimes open us up to different solutions for things that we had never thought of. Because we just see it from this one lens. And as a parent, I've laid out how things work. But you just ask your kid, if you were the parent, how would you do this? My son had a place he would put his backpack on the floor. I did not love it. That was not where backpacks go. It's making a mess and so on. And then, I took a step back and I said, hey, but how come you put the backpack there? Oh, that's where I remember it in the morning. Okay, well, what do I prefer? Him remembering his backpack in the morning or the backpack not making a mess? I have to weigh my goals here. And so then taking that step back of what are our goals? We want our evenings to be as fight-free as possible. Well, then are there some things I can read out of my pack schedule that don't need to be there that will serve us towards other?
And as a pediatrician, how do you feel about the role of boredom and unscheduled time versus programming every minute of our kids' lives with activities and sports and all the things? Like I know I have very strong feelings about this. I've talked about it before. And I know as an artist and a creative person that, ideas come from a place of boredom. So I'm interested what you what your professional take is on that.
Activity and sports, I think, are very beneficial for children from the standpoint of this is where they make lasting relationship with their peers. Just some of the disciplines that you can get, it does actually help towards learning to be prepared, learning to be ready, learning to lose and fail. That is a skill that, I don't think kids are learning enough these days. So all of those things are beneficial. Where I think the question mark comes in when we start making these club sports that have multiple practices per week and then multiple games over the weekends, that kind of overscheduling to me is really hard because, I'll tell kids, hey, you've got to get your 8 hours of sleep, eat your fresh fruits, vegetables, etc. But having been on the other side of it, when wherever we've been on sports teams, I noticed that those things start going away. We're running from school to wherever, so we stop and grab whatever quick it is that we can go, which is not the meal that I prefer for kids, And then we're rushing and we get to wherever it is. It's all scheduled. By the time we get home, everybody's nerves are frazzled. Eat something quick, go to bed, and wake up. And so that overscheduling is really, particularly for a neurodivergent child, is really hard because there's all those task switches and those transitions. And then all of those requirements to organize your time and your space and your stuff, that is really hard for them to do. And so, yes, I do agree that there should be downtime scheduled in there somewhere. And if you look at your schedule, for us, what has worked the best when we come home from school, before we get into any of the home things, we try to do a scheduled, even 15, 20 minutes, just downtime, do nothing, gives them a time to breathe. My son wants to go out and walk around in the woods, and that's his way of just kind of grounding himself. My daughter will go off and play, whatever it is, but just some time to be. And you're right, that is where the mind has time to just think, organize, and just kind of explore what are the things. And that is something that we're not doing a lot of or allowing our kids to do as much. I could go into the whole effect that it potentially even has on anxiety, depression, and so on. But I will agree, and this is something that's coming up with the American Academy of Pediatrics too, just looking at what are we doing with our sports scheduling and all of that, and what is the impact on mental health.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that. There's the impact of social media and busyness and huge, I think, way too much homework. I mean, there's just so many things that are contributing to the anxiety, depression, and impacting kids with ADHD. To wrap up, I mean, I know locally we have an amazing organization here called Connecting for Kids that is a great resource for parents with any kind of concerns or issues around their kids, including ADHD or different neurodivergent diagnoses. Do you have any recommendations for national resources people can turn to, look for, where they can get advice on parenting kids with ADHD? How can our listeners find you and connect with you?
I am on, my nephew laughs at me, I'm old school. I'm on Facebook still. Apparently that's really old. So you can find me, Maria Duroseau, on Facebook. And that's the same on LinkedIn. And then also I am figuring out Instagram. So it's burntoutparents.md as my on Instagram.
I love it. Okay, and we'll make sure to put links on our website page as well and on our show notes so people can find you. So thank you, Maria, for all your insights. I actually learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to really dive into some really practical, helpful insights.
Well, I'm glad, I always am rooting for the kids. I want them to do their best. And I think we have opportunities as the adults in their lives to really skill ourselves. So anytime I have a chance to share and teach whatever I can, I'm happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
That's a Hard No is a production of Clever Girl Marketing, my little agency in Cleveland, in partnership with our friends at Evergreen Podcasts. Many thanks to our amazing team, including Maura Del Rosario, our production and marketing coordinator, Noah Fouts, our amazing producer, editor, and composer who wrote our theme music and performed it with his band, The Big Leagues, and our new video producer and editor, Kay Holmberg. You can find show notes and resources on our website, and you can find other fun stuff on our socials. We're Hard No Podcast. Find your no, then say it with me.